It's almost like every day you turn on the television and you're going to see Pete Sousa on your screen. Working for ESPN, if you're in Texas, he also works in local television in Waco. The man has an incredible story and so grateful for the opportunity to share it here on the On to Something podcast. I'm Bryan Fenley, a broadcaster for ESPN. And of course, you know Pete. Pete does ESPN work for a variety of different sports. Pete, what I love about this conversation is that never is there a straight line drive to getting to where we need to get to in the biz. But right now, given the adversity, you're taking it to the rack and you're throwing it down two hand style. And I look forward to having this conversation with you.
That's the best intro I've ever gotten in my life. So officially now I'm on to something, and I really appreciate that, and I appreciate the fact that you put the time in to know my story and to know a little bit about me. That's flattering.
Well, obviously, some already know parts of your story. And from somebody like myself, like when we go through trauma, like I lost my dad when I was a kid to cancer, and it was a hellacious experience. And so when I see others in the business who are doing great things and are inspirational just based upon their work, but then they have all these other things that they've gone through or are going through, those are the people that I really latch on to like yourself. And when we started, even before we actually started recording this conversation, something you said to me, Pete, was where you are right now is magical. Where do you see the magic in everything?
Well, I have gratitude for where I've been, and I don't want to say, because I struggled with addiction for like 20 years. And if anybody, I start off with anybody out there struggling with addiction, it's not your fault. So I don't want to say, hey, I allowed myself to kind of fall or spiral. But I was at a point, more than 12 years ago where I was like, people thought I was hopeless. And I had the gift of desperation to actually do something, and take action. I was afforded opportunities to do that. And so when I took action, and so today I went to a recovery meeting today because that's kind of lightens my load, and just I talked to you about this. I got a college baseball game tonight. I knew I was going to do this. I wanted to get a little workout, and it makes me like I said, it just makes me feel a little lighter, and it makes me have perspective when somebody like you asks me a question and I say it's magical because I'm sitting here today with some real gratitude for what's going on in my life, and where I am today.
When you talk about the recovery meetings that you're in and how helpful they are, Pete, what do you get out of them when you're listening? And what do you get out of them when you're the one speaking?
It's a great question. I can answer it because I'm kind of I'm dialed in because I'm connected. Because again, I went to a meeting today. I've been talking to other people in recovery. Today we talked about I'm going like inside baseball, but we talked about what your character defects are, and whether your character defects are fear, or whether it's greed, or there are a lot of things that can cut us off from other people, right? Or whatever we consider spirituality. And a lot of those things are character defects. So when I got into a room today, and a lot of people, we weren't beating ourselves up. We were being honest. We talk about, hey, this happened today. I was impatient, and a lot of times those struggles we have emotionally are born out of the fact that we had anesthetized ourselves for so long. So I talk about it, and my girlfriend knows it. I got like arrested development in a sense where it's not like you lash out or act crazy, but there are sometimes like emotions that I need to process, that I never did until I was sober at 32, 33 years old. So that's sort of, and it's also a gift because now I know myself so well. When a certain emotion comes up, I'm like, oh, okay, like I know what this is. I'm scared. Just keep walking, dude. Like, and all of that, all these like gifts that I get out of being in recovery was all born out of hitting a bottom. So listening to other people today, I was like, wow, other people have what I have, and this goes for anybody who has a therapist, or you don't have to be an alcoholic or an addict. We all have our bag of hammers that we're carrying, some bigger than others. So when I have a buddy in recovery who says you throw all your problems with everybody else into the middle of the room, you'll probably take yours back. That's a lot of times what the case is. So listening to other people, I'm able to feel okay, like I'm in this with a group and I'm not alone. And then when I speak, I just try to share my experience. That's all I have. There's no opinions when it comes to recovery. I just have my experience and working towards getting sober and staying sober.
When you were at your lowest, Pete, who was there to love you?
Well, my parents, which is not everybody's story, and so I was super fortunate with that. My one brother, who has just passed away, who was like a force of nature. He lived in Hermosa, out where you are, on the West Coast in LA. He cut me off because he was like, it's too much, and he kind of told me that he had just kind of considered me kind of a dead man. So any positive would be, getting sobriety would be a bonus. And then my one brother, Michael, he was there for me because we were closer in geographic proximity. And then every time I walked into a room trying to get sober, people were there for you. If you're there trying, they're there for you. If you're willing to put in the work, they're there for you. So those were the people I can think of initially who were there for me. And my brother Kevin, I mentioned him because by cutting me off, it was one of those consequences you get in life, which really actually help you because it was like, oh, wow, like he's not Kevin, my brother, who are so close. So that was one of those things where it's kind of like, all right, everything luckily for me happened for a reason. The people cut me off who needed to cut me off. The people who love me love me. But at the end of the day, I took action.
And by you taking action, Pete, what was that like regaining the trust of those around you who saw what you were going through and they felt for you and they didn't know what to do? And now you're on the rise, you're on the up and up, and you're ready to turn anew.
Well, when I got it, it's weird. I don't want to say I got it because even today I got to stay. You know what I mean? I got to, and it's not so much about drinking again, Brian. It's about, hey, I just want to be a contributing member of society and be the best version of me. Because like those emotions we talked about, I want to be able to flow and live life like a loose shirt, like I'm wearing a loose shirt, or approach life like it's a loose shirt. And I, I think that when I talk about it, wait, what was the question again? Let me help me out.
Yeah. So it was like essentially when you're on the way up, like
Yes. Okay. Great
you've
job.
hit rock
Okay.
bottom and then
Yeah.
regaining the trust of
Yeah.
those who are around
Okay.
you. Yeah.
So it's one of those things. I was so in. Okay. I was so all in that I think at first people were kind of like, "Hey, what's that? What's happening?" But at the same time, when you're really doing it, it comes out of you. Like people, when you're really taking action and working on being sober and staying sober, it's undeniable the energy that you're giving off. And I had never gone all in like that before. I used to tell people I was going to stop drinking because I just wanted people off my back. I had a back problem. People say, I didn't have I was so I loved it, and that was part of the problem. And you know, when I finally bought in, people just that's a process of making amends to people and sitting down in front of them and dealing with whatever reaction they have, because over the course of time, you're responsible for whatever it is you did. Um, and so that whole process, it's really all about living it and not so much worrying about how these people are receiving you in this, new light. It's just a matter of putting another foot, one before the other every day.
And then to think about like where you are now and to then think about where you've been and
I'm on your
have
podcast for getting questions you asked me. I mean, that's so clearly I'm still not, I got a lot of work to do.
what are you
So go,
talking about?
yeah, go ahead. Go ahead.
Yeah,
I had to refresh my memory. Yeah.
yes, no,
Yeah.
this is so the even now to have like a loving empathy for yourself, like when from your earlier years, what is that like in your day-to-day now, just that loving empathy?
I think it's, I tell anybody that comes into early recovery, you should just conceptually, you should wear a shirt that says handle with care. You got to take it easy on yourself. You just have to. And you have to learn to love yourself. And I think the only way to do that is by doing things the right way. So when you do things the right way, you start to feel good about yourself, because if you do something esteemable, it builds self-esteem. So it's not even so much of like, okay, I'm making a decision today to love myself, right? I mean, you can try to do that, and you can work on it every day. Like, I'm going to love myself with affirmations. Again, for me, what made me feel good about myself was just doing the next indicated right thing, just like it does today. If I'm preparing to do a game, the only thing that takes me out of the fear about doing a game or whether or not I'm going to do my best is prepping, right? Or whether it's watching a game or deep diving into somebody's background, and that preparation breeds confidence. I feel good about myself. Same thing with life. If I'm doing things that are esteemable, I'm going to feel good about myself. And if I don't, then I won't feel good about myself. I mean, a guy once, it's funny too, the people you come across. This guy was, he was in Philly, and he's kind of a nut job, but when he would talk, it happens. You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
anybody can come through those doors, and that's great. But the guy was saying, this is a great example of that. He was saying, stop drinking and doing shit you're ashamed of.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, just stop doing that. And it's amazing what simple things like that can do, and how they can aid in the process of loving yourself.
Loving yourself in the form of preparing for a broadcast and being able to show the best version of yourself. How is the art of broadcasting? How has that been almost like an escape for you?
Well, I think it goes back to, and I've been thinking about this recently, the more and more I just look at myself and look at my journey, right? And my process as a kid. Sports was, I did not grow up in, like, well, some people might say different. My household, my dad was the greatest, but he was an alcoholic, but he was functional. My mom loved us to death. I was the youngest of three boys. So by the time I came around, they'd kind of polished it up a little bit. Like, I almost, like, I had a different set of parents than my
Mm.
oldest brother, because they were probably a little less refined and just figuring it out. So I had it pretty darn good. And one of the things I just did was I'd sit in front of the television. I'd watch Vin Scully. I'd watch Brent Musburger. Jim Nance, even at the time, he was starting to do CBS college football. And it was the most alluring thing as a world. One thing that really was, you talk about an escape, NFL Films,
Mm.
was the way that they would take these sporting events and turn them into motion pictures. I was totally captivated. And I can remember one time, it was around the Super Bowl, ESPN started to broadcast the Super Bowl highlights done by NFL Films, obviously of previous Super Bowls. They would do like a 24-hour marathon into the Super Bowl, Super Sunday. And I would just watch those, Brian. And I was like crazy. I was like, it was euphoria, dude. And then another thing was, I remember my parents, I was Catholic, we would go to church. And after church, we would, maybe if we had behaved ourselves, get some Dunkin' Donuts. And I can remember, like a little mini sports junkie, sitting in front of my television set with the Philadelphia Inquirer, all the logos and the matchups and the point spreads, Dunkin' Donuts, like two or three donuts, and watching Jimmy the Greek, Brent Musburger, Irv Cross. It was just amazing. And that to me was my first real escape. And my mom worked for Villanova Athletics. She worked in the athletic department. And so that was a major conduit for me into sports. It was right after Villanova won the NCAA championship. She was the athletic director's administrative assistant. Back then we said secretary. And so it was the greatest experience of my life. Both my parents were working. My dad worked at Amtrak. So I would come home from my school and walk up to Villanova. We lived about like 3 minutes away, not even. And I would just hang out at what was then called the Jake Nevin Field House. The practice was going on below my mom's office. It was amazing. And it wasn't one of those, now you get like booted out of those facilities, right? Like as a kid. But back then it was just like, I was like a little gym rat running around, and it was awesome. So that was a real escape for me. Honestly, I still don't know that I've totally developed, where there's probably stuff going around me, that was kind of wacky, like with my dad, and my mom, just like not like everybody's got it, dude, in their family,
Mhm.
like something. And I think that to what you said, because you're very good at this, I can already tell. I've watched you, but now like experiencing
It's
it.
just
No, really,
repetition. That's all it is.
no,
It's just
yeah,
repetition.
it's exactly what it is. But either way, it's how you arrived here. You're good. Um, yeah, that was an escape. I mean, that truly was an escape, and so that is still an escape for me. That's why I love to
Mm.
prepare, because I would sit in the athletic department at Villanova, and Craig Miller, who was the sports information director at the time, he then went on to USA Basketball and ran with the NBA, the Dream Team PR. I mean, he's a heavy hitter. He just recently retired, but I would sit in Craig's office and just pour through these media guides. And they didn't just have Villanova's media guide; they had everybody else in the Big East. And then maybe if earlier that year they played Florida State, well, they have Florida State's media guide. I mean, it was just like, I was, it was the greatest.
The very first game you called, what was the environment like?
Hmm. Everybody's ever asked me that question. So I was a freshman or a sophomore at the University of Richmond. I went to Richmond to play football. I was lucky enough to get a scholarship. They found out I had a heart problem, so I couldn't play football, but they kept me on scholarship, and they had me work with the team. It was a great experience, and it really helped me kind of get through college on track. One of my teammates was this walk-on named Adam Wilimowski, and Adam was feisty, to put it lightly. And he was like, we talked about our love of broadcasting together probably early our freshman year, and he's like, let's do the games on the radio. And I was like, can we do that? And literally back then, this is like 1997, he just went to the student radio station and talked the woman in that we were going to do the basketball games this season. So we had the equipment. So that was it. It was game over. So the first game of the season, the guys who did it the year before are like, hey, that's our job. And the woman who was running the radio station was like, well, I gave the equipment to Adam Wilimowski, so you guys are out of luck. So we came to an agreement. This is hilarious. The first game I ever called was at the Dean Smith Center. It was Richmond and North Carolina. These other guys called these other guys. One guy was named Simon, and the other guy's named Derek Smith. I still keep in touch with Derek. He's at Davidson now. And then Adam and I called the second half. So they called the first half. We called the second half. I really can tell you, I've never been more prepared for anything in my life, just because I'd called so many games with the sound off and whatever. And I think we just wore those two dudes out, because we did the second half, and we just never, thanks to Adam, we never gave the equipment back. So that was the first game I ever did, and the environment was amazing. It was just, they put us, of course, we're student radio, so we were up like on like now everybody's up there, but we were up there, everybody else was downstairs. We were probably on like the suite level. It was just an amazing experience. But the thing about it was, I remember thinking, oh, I can do this. That was like, I can do this. Like, this is not something I cannot do. And it was up and down college basketball, and we did the games for the rest of the year and the next 2 years.
When you said at that moment you could do this, what was that revelation that allowed you to think that?
I was keeping up with the game. My vocabulary wasn't like, even sometimes now I'm calling games. I'm like, God, why did you say, knocked it down like 3 times? Like, stop saying, like,
Yeah.
I try to, as you do, right? You just try to, you want to mix it up. And that's compliments I've gotten. Hey, you mix it up. Your vocabulary is good. I kind of had that early on. So I think that my ability to keep up with the game and not make it sound dull. And with radio, obviously, you're really painting a picture. And I remember I called my dad before the game, before we drove from Richmond to Chapel Hill, and he was like, just paint a picture. And my dad was by no means a sports buff, but we talked about it. And I remember thinking like, yeah, that's my job, just paint a picture. And again, I don't think there's no Emmy sitting here, on any of my shelves from that game, but it was a great experience, and it was one of those things where, oh, okay, I can do this.
What has your love of the English language been like in the ways in which you immerse yourself into expanding your vocabulary?
Well, I mean, it's basic in a sense that I think I learned how to talk from like Brent Musburger. I really do. Or, living in Philadelphia, Harry Callis was the Phillies play-by-play guy. He did a lot of NFL film stuff. Just a legendary guy. He did NFL games. Those guys really sort of taught me how to talk in a way. So I find myself still to this day. I mean, I'll say something like Villanova won the '85 championship, and I must have watched that game 150 times. That's not a lie. So sometimes I'll say myself like, ice water in his veins. They gave him the shot and he took it. Like, that's exactly what Brent Musburger said. I don't plan on saying that. It's just part of my, vocab. Now, as far as getting better, I will now read stuff or hear stuff, and I will write it down and just think, hey, maybe at some point I'll call a guy an escape artist that can get out of a jam, can dribble through traffic. I might not do it. I might not ever do it. But like, I do make a conscious effort, like when I hear stuff, oh, that's awesome. And it doesn't necessarily, a lot of times, Brian, it's not during a basketball game or a football game, but it's just somebody calls somebody an escape artist. I'm like, that's awesome.
Yeah.
Right. Or somebody talks about somebody, you're an LA guy. Oh, he vibrates on a different level. Well, tonight he's got 32 points and 10 assists. He's vibrating on a different level than everybody else. Like, that's stuff that we can infuse. And I like to do that because as much as I listen to those guys who were refined when I grew up, I think that the one thing that we all have, that you have, that I have as broadcasters, as we start to develop, like it's certainly not about me. It's about the game and it's about the fans. But there's just nobody else in the world who's going to talk about sports the way that I am going to talk about sports. Joe and Terry Sousa's kid, it has a different way of speaking about sports. So I always try to just bring some of that, and a lot of that is my roots, like 80s, 90s college basketball, college football, NFL, the way those games were called. But I'm always trying to add new wrinkles.
You bring the individuality to it, and it's inherently who you are.
Yeah, I don't try to I did a game this weekend with Jason Williams or Scott Williams, sorry, who played at UNC, played in the NBA for the Bulls for 3 years, won 3 championships, had a really impressive NBA career. And it was his first game at ESPN, and he's really good, by the way, really good. So we were talking about it, and it was just, he is a naturally exuberant guy, as am I. And I think we both enjoyed the fact that it wasn't like an over-the-top broadcast. I don't think. I haven't heard from anybody else differently. But it was definitely two guys enjoying a game. Here's a good example. And he could have been full of BS, but we were doing Joe Lunardi at halftime, right?
Yes.
I mean, the guy has got a gazillion things going on. But our production team at ESPN did an amazing job. They connect with him. He's in Ocean City, New Jersey, probably somewhere down the Jersey Shore, watching these games, doing what he does this time of year, which I don't even know how he would ever even start to do that, but he does an amazing job. So we checked in with him during a timeout. He'd probably been listening to us for 3 minutes. And, hey, Joe, do you have us here? It's Pete Sousa, Scott Williams. He's like, yeah. He goes, man, you guys are great. Like, it's fun. He was like, you guys are having fun. And he may have said that to every other guy. But I do hear a lot of times, and again, there is a lot of guys out there who are more polished than me and better than me or whatever, right? But I believe that. I know that. I have a long way to go and continue to cultivate my skill and calling games. I think you're never done. Certainly I'm not. And I always hear, hey, like you're enjoying, you're having fun. Sports, it's about fun. There are moments where it's tense, where it's serious, but it's about having fun. And I think that, that's something that's awesome. Like it's really like, I enjoy doing play-by-play. I enjoy my job. I mean, that's pretty cool.
When you're working with an analyst that you're vibing with, as they say out here in LA, or the vibrations, as you mentioned.
Yeah.
How often, Pete, are you throwing questions at the analyst as opposed to just having a conversation where maybe a question isn't needed, but there's something that needs to be elaborated, maybe something needs to be specified and described more? where you're coming in with questions?
Well, I'm naturally curious, and I'm fortunate, like a lot like you. Like I grew up a sports junkie, so when I get the note that I'm going to be working with Scott Williams, I'm like, oh my gosh, like there's a million things I want to ask Scott Williams about, right? And I know his career, I know his college career, I know his NBA career, I know exactly what his role was. It's rare, just being like a nerdy sports guy at my age, that I'll work with someone that I don't know. Reed Geddes, right? He was on Phi Slamma Jamma's team at the University of Houston, all-time assist leader. Being the nerd that I am, I mean, I knew all about Reed Geddes, and he and I sat down. We had an hour and a half between Kansas State and Texas shoot around one day, sitting in the Moody Center, and I must have asked him 1,000 questions about Phi Slamma Jamma, and he's like, "Man, I'll tell you, somebody probably. This guy's an attorney too. He's like, somebody probably asks me about this every day, but I don't know that I've ever talked about it this much in in like years. And that's just my curiosity. I'm curious. So I think there's a blend when I think it's really important to know your analyst, like know exactly who he is, know a lot about them. That's part of the preparation. Um, because there have been guys that I haven't known, a ton about. And then you learn about him, and then that's a whole nother journey in preparation. It's like, oh, this is so interesting. This guy coached for this guy, and he was mentored by this guy. It's a really cool journey. So I think it becomes natural as long as you're prepared, and you know who you're calling the game with, so you know their background. Scott Williams is another great example. Scott Williams he's a big man. He worked with bigs. So we had this guy Garland who was so impressive on Oklahoma State. This big guy, 6'11", McDonald's All-American. Mm-hmm. And I'm like, hey, Scott, like, what's going to be the next step for this guy? You develop, big man. Like, how do you see this guy, and what's his trajectory? And it's like he can go on that. And so it's never like cooked up in a sense. But I will have, and Roy Philpott is like a mentor of mine,
Sure.
as is my man Matt Devlin. Those are two guys who I've just leaned on in this business. And Roy has told me, given me some great advice. Like I do write down questions for analysts, like ahead of the game, just so again, for me, it's the act of preparation, just writing them down, and it's just kind of like things that this person could expand on, knowing their career. I don't always do a ton of it. And if I work with a guy, I probably don't need to, but it's a good form for me, like preparation.
I love what you said. I know you got to run. I want, if I could,
No, dude, I got time. I got really a lot of fun.
Yeah, this is a blast. We might have to do a part 2, but I do want to throw one more question at you. And for all the question asking that you do, what is the one question about yourself that is directed at you that you like to answer the most?
Oh man, it's a great question. Well, I think it's like when people. It goes back to the beginning. Like how did you get sober? How did you do this? Because people see how I used to be, or they hear about how I used to be, and they don't quite believe it. Again, I'm not this incredibly furnished person now, but I'm getting there. Like it's and I continue to develop every day, and I'm a long way from where I was 12 years ago. So I get to tell them that I was a broken person. Some people thought I was hopeless, and I was able to finally stop fighting and start listening to people who had gone before me and done the same thing. And my life changed. And it wasn't about me. It was about following directions and taking action. And it doesn't happen overnight, but it's pretty amazing. Like I always tell the story, I went to rehab. I lived in a recovery house. When I lived in a recovery house, I worked at Kentucky Fried Chicken, this is after I did PR in the NBA. It was wild. When I was in rehab, we would play baseball outside, and I would call the games like when we were playing baseball. I mean, that's something I haven't thought about that in forever. I'd be like, here's Fenley at the plate in the off season. He enjoys binging on Coors Light, and walking around his town under the influence. 2-0 pitch. Like it was just like stupid stuff like that. But you got to have a sense of humor about it too. It's fun. You're on the other side of all that craziness. But yeah, that's my favorite question because to me, that's the one, no matter what I'll do in life, like I'm uniquely qualified to help somebody that's going through what I went through. And that can be like it can be a struggle. It's really, people can get, it's, people die all the time. So to be able to maybe play a small role in telling somebody, hey, here's how it went. That's my favorite question when they ask me, hey, what'd you do? How'd you get sober?
And people are going to glean that inspiration from listening and watching this conversation. And it's untold, Pete, how many lives you've already influenced in the right way, and how many more are going to continue to, because of the advocate you are and the man you are, and how fun it was to encapsulate all of this. And what was an abbreviation of your story? We might have to do a part two at some point. Pete Sousa, I'm Bryan Fenley. Pete, this was so fun, man. Thanks for doing this.
Thank you, Brian. It was a great opportunity. I was stoked to do it. And you're very, very, very good at this. So thanks.